Okay, welcome to another episode of Panakal, podcast for geeks, the show about good friends hanging out, talking about things we love. Today, my guest is John Picacio, whose last name I just learned to say properly. And you guys all know Andrew Sides, my occasional co-host. How you guys doing today?
Good, hanging in. It's been a busy morning, but
you're a busy guy. We were just trying to get you to sign up for Discord. I'm like, hanging out. How do I send a message to this guy? And I was like looking on your, I was looking through Facebook Messenger first, and then I was like, I couldn't message you on Discord. Discord was like, this dude hasn't added you, so you can't even talk to him. And I was like, okay.
I think I've done my best to limit my conduits so I can just try to stay focused. I gotta admit.
Yeah.
I know that it's really hip right now to be on everything, on TikTok, on Twitch, on Discord, on every social media platform, and I just feel like I'm just kind of just putting a knife in it and just saying enough. You know, like Facebook Messenger, I can't stand it.
Messenger, I try to move all my friends. I've moved a bulk of my friends away from Messenger into just Discord, and I try to keep everything in Discord, mainly because all my Ancient One social media, like all the stuff I do for the projects, I have my own server and everything sits in Discord. So it's like my go-to spot for everyone to learn about what I'm working on. But it's been a little, you try to avoid Facebook Messenger and stuff, but some people just don't want to leave it.
Yeah, I've got two friends that it's pretty much them that I'm only on Facebook Messenger for. Because we still all chat, and they're some of my closest friends, so they're the only reason I have it around for that. Otherwise, no one else contacts me through that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still email, I'm still texting.
You are actually really good at responding to emails, which is good. A lot of people are. I'm bad at it. My cousin.
That's what my clients get me, so I better be paying attention.
So you got your clients, and then you got me, just messing me.
No, I mean your friends too. I mean, honestly, I'm so old school that what I tell people who are in my circles, I basically say, look, forget the text, forget the emails, just voice call me for God's sake. Because I'm so faster with I'm not one of those guys that gets on the phone and they ask me the question and then I start saying, well, how are you doing and how is your family and how are you getting through COVID? We just say it, we get it done, and we just hang up on each other, and there's no ugliness, there's no lack of courtesy, but it's just in and out. And I'm so much faster with that than I am sitting there trying to do my work while I'm constantly trying to text people. It just, I cannot text and draw at the same time. I have yet to find the artist that can text and draw literally simultaneously. I mean, you can do one or the other while you're kind of keeping your eyes on both, but you can't draw and text at the same time. So I just throw the thing in a drawer, frustrate all my friends, unless they just want to listen and voice call me and just say, hey, I have this question, and we answer it, and then I hang up. So you're on that list if you want, man. We can make that happen. You can just be one of those guys that just calls me and says, hey, what about this? I answer it, and then we move on.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, I had a mild panic this morning where I was just like, how do I get a hold of this guy? But
that's cool.
No, it's all good. We can talk about that later. But let's talk about you, because that's what we got you on the show. So I briefly have, you sent me some stuff to look over, which was great because I was trying to figure out exactly. I know you have a lot of side projects that you can't talk about yet, and then you have projects that you can talk about. Obviously, you've been in the business for 25 years, so that's a long time. That's a lot longer than Andrew and myself.
Oh God, yeah. Do you want to start from recent and then kind of work backwards, or do you want to go past it real quick and then move forward from there?
I think it's however you guys want, but I'll tell you, I'll give you an insight. So this last Twitter, I guess, and on my Facebook, and I think also on Instagram, and I think about it, I guess on all three of those, I've been kind of posting every day something from my last 25 years, kind of celebrating the 25th anniversary. Today is the last post, actually. Today is the 25 of 25, and I just posted it right before I came on the air here. And it's the most looking back I've done in a very, very long time, because I make it, I'm almost, I'm like a psychopath about, I don't want to look backwards. I mean, literally, I don't know, you guys are probably saying, there's probably a lot of artists watching this that are the same, in that, the older your work gets, the more you dislike it. Maybe there are others.
Yeah, I'd have a hard time showing a lot of my I don't hate my older stuff because I know it's what brought me to where I am now. But I look at it like, what were you even thinking when you made this? You know,
I have work that from like 10 years ago, it's a completely different artist because I was in a totally different field and stuff. And it's like, yeah, I can't even call it myself at this point.
Yeah. So, I mean, looking back at that stuff every day for the last 25 days or so, you know, it further reinforces that I'm really not a guy that likes looking in the rearview mirror. I mean, I think most good artists usually are probably that way. And I'm not saying I'm just saying that I know I'm programmed that way. So I'm probably in the right field, and that nostalgia is not really my game when it comes to my own work. I mean, it's like, what have I done? What did I do yesterday? And what am I going to do tomorrow? And most importantly, what am I doing right now? And, you know, how am I pushing it? So yeah, you can go in whatever order you want. I'll answer whatever you want, or try to.
I think it would be nice to hear like about your growth from where you started to where you are, because I think a lot of people are on that same boat right now.
All right, fire away. Do you want me to start, or you want to ask?
Yeah, man, knock yourself out. Yeah.
Basically, I never like to call myself a self-taught artist, but because I guess we all are in a way. Even if we
even if we went to school, we still had to learn. Like I feel like I learned the bulk of what I know outside of school. Obviously, most of us did.
From the people that you decide to put around you, your collection of friends and cohorts, and the people you look up to. So nobody's creating a vacuum, and I'm no different. Yeah, I didn't have an art school education. I'm a kid who grew up with comics in his DNA. Basically reading comics literally from the word go. Like my first reading material is superhero comics, DC, Marvel, and we're talking way back in the 70s because I'm an ancient guy.
Yeah.
So I grew up with comics, and it's how I learned how to read. And it was growing up, it was what I wanted to do when I was an adult. And you know, as you go through school, you know, things happen, and people say, "Well, you can't really make money in art." I was one of those guys that kept getting told that. And then when I got into high school, you know, I got some scholarship opportunities. It's just long story short. Grades were good, and colleges gave me offers, but not for art. It was for academic stuff. And coming from my family, hardworking, blue collar, Mexican American family, who didn't have a whole lot of college experience in the family. And so I was getting a shot at a 4-year ride, not fully paid, but pretty well. And so there was a lot of pressure to go for a professional degree, quote unquote. I'm sure there's people out there who heard that trip from their parents. And so what does that mean? Of course, that means doctor, lawyer, engineer.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be a pharmacist or a doctor.
Right? And so, of course, being the dork that I was, I said, well, drawing is it for me. That's the beginning, the middle, and the end. So what professional degree can you draw with? Well, architects get to draw all day. So I chose architecture, and it was literally that stupid of a decision of just saying, well, architecture, you can draw all day. So maybe I'll go for that degree because that'll please them and I can draw. Mm-hmm. So I went to UT Austin, University of Texas at Austin, on a pretty significant series of scholarships that got me through the 5-year program. But there was a trip in third year of architecture school where they took some students to Europe, and I was on that trip, and I would say that was the pivot point for me. So what year is that? That's the fall of 1990. So think about what's kind of happening at that point. You've got Vertigo and the Sandman comic. Vertigo's kind of finding its legs at that point. It's not really hit its stride, but it's finding its legs. There was a graphic novel called Violent Cases by Dave McKean, or by Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was their first graphic novel. And I think that had just come out at that point. And I think I found a black and white volume, not a color volume, but an original British black and white volume when I was on that trip. John Muth's painted graphic novel work, his early stuff like Moonshadow was around. Kent Williams' early painted stuff, George Pratt's Enemy Ace, all of that painted.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
All of that painted graphic novel stuff was everything to me at that point. And then I get thrown into all these museums in Europe and all of these, comic book stores. Actually, I was always playing hooky for my projects to go to the comic book stores in all the cities that we went. And so all that stuff was happening when I was about 20, I guess. So still no art school education, but that influx of stimuli on top of just drawing constantly started to shift me. Let's just put it that way, where I really understood that in a very profound way that just drawing other people's buildings was not going to cut it. You know, and so that trip, I kind of knew the days were numbered for architecture. So just to kind of speed this along, I got my degree in architecture, started working as an intern architect, but all along while I'm sort of, what do you call yourself, Alan? What do you say? Like artist by day, hero by night?
Yeah. Somebody actually read that?
Like that.
I don't think anyone actually read that.
By day and comic book dork by night. And I don't mean collector. I mean like sitting there trying to figure out the nuts and bolts of writing and drawing my own comics, self-publishing them. Because again, we're talking around 93, 94 at this point.
That's like the height of it at that point.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly, man. Yeah, that's when that black and white independent boom was happening. Dave Sim from Cerebus was very kind and kind of gave a little bit of a boost to me and the guy that I was working with, a guy named Fernando Ramirez. We did a book called Words and Pictures, and we put out a couple of issues of it, and book publishers started seeing the work that I was doing in there, and the covers look nothing like my work now. They're very photo-driven. Again, I think at that point I'm drawing a lot, but I don't have the confidence in my drawing chops, if you know what I'm saying. I think we've all been through that, right? Yeah. So, you know, my stuff is very pen and ink as far as my sequential storytelling, but my covers are very photographic. They're not really, again, I'm not trusting my drawing skills enough at that point. But the covers still start to get noticed by book publishers. And so this one book publisher called Mojo Press out of Texas, no longer around, but they came and said, would you like to do this cover for a Michael Moorcock book? And I knew who Mike Moorcock was. I knew he was a huge, huge deal in fantasy literature. But I didn't have interest in this stuff at that moment. I was interested in doing comics. And so they kept pushing. They said, wouldn't you like to do this cover? This would be really great. And I said, well, who does the interiors and who does the typesetting and who does the jacket layout and who designs the end flaps? And they said, why do you want to know all that? And it's like, well, if nobody's doing it, could I do it? Mm-hmm. And they said, have you ever had experience doing it? And I said, well, you're asking me to do the cover illustration, but I've never had experience doing that. So why can't I do these things too? Completely arrogant 20-something answer. But basically I said, if I can build a house, why can't I build a book? And I guess that was enough for them to say, all right, let's give this dummy, you know, a shot at this and let him design this entire book and do all the work. They offered me a nice little chunk of money and I did it. And the process of doing that book, not just the cover, but starting to understand just how books are put together, what's not just the actual physical construction of a book, but how you think through all the layout elements and down to the typesetting. Yeah. And having to do that myself, I just absolutely fell in love. And I think, and I just posted this morning on Facebook and Twitter. I'll post it on Instagram after this. But Moorcock himself, I don't know how many people out there are familiar with Michael Moorcock, but this is a guy that comes around in the early 60s, especially into the mid 60s in England. And he's, I guess, what is he, like 17 years old in the 60s, and puts out a fanzine called New Worlds, where he's like the editorial director. Yeah. And you got like J.G. Ballard, let's see, M. John Harrison comes from his sphere. God, I'm going to start blanking on all these names, but there's a huge influx of how do you say this? What I guess at that point would be considered sort of an alternative scene of science fiction authors that much like with the music scene at that point, with the Beatles creating a British invasion of the U.S., these authors eventually, not maybe as fast as the Beatles influenced music, but those authors start to infect the way American or U.S. science fiction and fantasy work. He creates this character called Elric with a guy named James Cawthorne. They're like these two young guys that are looking at Robert E. Howard's Conan. Oh, yeah. And say, you know, this guy kind of has all these very patriarchal values that kind of reflect like U.S. cowboy movies and war movies. They're very male values. And what if we did something that was more like the James Dean version of this guy? And that's where Elric comes from. And he's like goth before goth knew it was goth. And it's albino sword, this albino sorcerer with this sword that sucks out people's souls. And, you know, these days with all the things that we think about the law and chaos elements of D&D and a lot of the sort of fundamental tenets of role-playing games, come from the things that he was doing in those Elric books. So we look at that. We look at the way he was influencing music at that point, where he was doing collaborations with Hawkwind and Blue Oyster Cult on into the 70s. This guy affected music. He affected role-playing games, literature on 2 continents, if not worldwide. So I knew this guy was a big deal. I do this cover, and working with him and listening to him and having him have confidence in me, it changed everything. That was a very long-winded way of saying that this guy literally was the pivot point for my whole career. Just in the simple thing of saying, you're the artist, you figure it out. Mm-hmm. You know, I was one of those artists at that moment with my first job saying, what do you think? What should I do with this? You know, do you have any ideas you want to give me? And I would, even to this day, one of the biggest things I pass on, I hope, to other young artists is to say, you know, when we're given a job, the more you can sort of take it upon yourself to bring the ideas to the thing, as opposed to asking your art director or the people around you to tell you what they want, the better. The longer the career you have. Why? It's because you'll burn out. You'll have much less a chance to burn out the more you're just taking upon yourself to have the responsibility of coming up with the ideas and putting your own person into it, as opposed to always going to them and saying, what do you want? Because you get tired after a while of saying, what do you want? But once you've fed that mill, they just kind of get used to that. You have to be the one that has to be told what to do. And Mike just set that straight from the beginning. He was like, you're the artist, you figure out. I could tell you what to do, but I'm not. And he never said I could tell you what to do. He just said, I still remember where I was and what the temperature of the room was and
nice.
who was there and the dust in the air. I just remember being in his office and asking him that question and him saying, you're the artist, you figure it out. And that really did set the tone for my whole career from then on, because I really realized that it wasn't just what came out of my right hand, it was what was coming out of my head. And he wanted me to bring something fresh. It doesn't matter that I hadn't done anything before. It's like, what do you have to offer? And if you don't, get the hell out of here. I love that attitude.
That's
you guys
like
ever have
trial by fire. I'm occasionally, when he's really busy right now, but I mentor under Sean Andrew Murray on the side for world building stuff. And Sean it's not so like trial by fire to say, but Sean does have a way of teaching where he won't tell you exactly what to do. He'll just ask the right questions to kind of get you there. Like, why did you decide to do this? And then occasionally he'll say, he wants you to think. Like, I'll talk to him about my world building. I'll be like, I want to put this character in this scenario, and here's this thumbnail that I did for the piece. And he'll be like, well, it has to say more. And he won't tell you what that more is, right? Like, the last piece that I worked on it's just in my head, I was like, this is basic. It's a ship flying through a nebula, nothing crazy. But then he's like, it doesn't read like a story. Like, sure, you've got a nebula and you got a ship, but then what else? What does it say? What's the mood? You're not setting. So he'll ask you the right questions to get your brain flowing, but he never will say, you should put asteroids. I basically put asteroids in the foreground, and it gave it a little more depth, right? But he never outright said, put some asteroids here, or put a space station here, right? He's always like, you do the work, because that's how I get it now. But initially, when I was first learning from him, I was like, teach me. Like, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong, right? I also, I mentored under Ron Lemon too, and it was a little bit of the same. Like, they want you to like learn. They want you get your brain flowing enough. And I'll admit, I still screw that up all the time. I constantly make pieces. I'm lucky enough to be with a group of, Scott Fisher has we created a Discord called the Rusty Skillet, where if you were in his class, you're in the group. And Andrew is in that group, and we're all in there, and we have a crit group where we just drop.
Never in the class.
Yeah, well, you're a special scenario. Don't everybody think you can get in. Like, Andrew's a special scenario. You shouldn't have said that out loud, but he did, and it's live. But like, we're lucky enough. We have, like, I'm lucky enough. I feel like I've got a group of friends now where I can send them. John, yourself, I've sent you pieces to look at where somebody has looked at it and just either A, given me some form of advice, or B, just kind of ask the right questions, which you initially would look at. I would look at and say, that's not really the advice I was looking for. But if I really sat down and thought about it, it was good advice. It's the right questions, if that makes sense.
I think those are good friends, honestly, who can do that for you. Put the questions out there as opposed to putting answers upon you. I mean, in the end, I mean, I posted something yesterday on Twitter. It was something about Bosch or Hieronymus Bosch. What are we talking about? A guy who was born in around 1450. I don't think anybody really knows when he was born, but we know he died about 1516. So, way over 500 years ago. And yet you look at his fantasy paintings. Look at his paintings.
Yeah, his paintings. They didn't know what fantasy was yet.
Well, he's doing it. He's doing what we now in contemporary times or time consider fantasy. And his stuff is still weirder than almost any concept artist, major fantasy artist out there. I mean, go look at some of this. I posted this picture yesterday of like this bird creature with swallowing a human being with its ass up with birds flying out of the guy's ass. And this is probably done in the early 1500s. And it's immaculately painted. It's gorgeous, and I guess what's my point of bringing that up? I had a point here, and I just lost it here. But basically, it's the idea of, I know what I said. So there was a writer named Cat Howard, phenomenal writer, who came in and said, something about, I always tell myself when I'm doing a manuscript, add a little bit, I put little notes in my manuscript to myself, she said, and I often find myself saying, make it weirder, add more weird. And I said a comment, and I realize now that I don't think I've ever quite articulated this way before. To get something to be weirder, you have to make it more personal. Yeah. And I just typed it very quickly. I didn't read. I was, again, like you do with Twitter, where you're just answering a friend. But that's like something I would usually say in a direct message, not out in public. But there it was. And I realize now that, that is really it. And I think I've always understood that when I look at your work, when I look at, I'm going to get his name wrong. What is it? Bruce Bernese?
Bernese.
Oh, Bernese, yeah.
I mean, I'm just pulling him out because I've said this to him. I think his best stuff is his weirdest stuff. And I feel like that about a lot of the artists I love, that, when the more personal it gets, the more I like it. And usually that means the stuff gets weirder and more intense, because it's not there to kind of please to please everyone.
And that's, I remember when I first started, I talked to you about this at that first Spectrum that I met you at, where everyone, like, people were like, I had people telling me stuff like, this stuff's not going to fly. Look, it's too out there. It's too not fully completed to them, whatever. And I was always like, this is the only way I know how to create art right now. And this is the only way I'm not going to change. I did initially, there was a moment where I thought I would study harder and level up my rendering and all this stuff. But then I was like, why are you doing that? Because then it's no longer your style, right? And, but
there's something, very sort of impressionistic and expressionistic about not just the way you're building shapes, but your color palette is very, very intense, and it's very personal and unique. And I don't think those are defects. I think you're recognizing that those are strengths. And all of us have to refine our game. Yeah. But
there's always room for growth, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's all this is.
You're constantly learning. I learned something new about Photoshop last week, and I'm just like, I'm going to see where I can use that somewhere someday.
Oh yeah, that was. Yeah, I remember that when that was shared within the Discord group, right? Was that when it was? Yeah. I remember talking about like how, like, making it your own thing kind of thing. I remember, like, I used to lament about not being able to, like, paint like a lot of artists that I do know in terms of how they can render and all that. And over time, I just kind of realized, like, I really can't think in painting in terms of, like, mass and tone and that kind of thing. At least, like, in the way that, like, Greg Manchess or even someone like James Gurney does, where they know how to, like, model the form like that and express that through paint. Like, I just don't have that ability. But I realized over time that, at least for me, like, the things that I prefer is, like, I prefer drawing, and I prefer to see the drawing show through the finish as much as I can. Even that means I have to bring the drawing back into it after I laid on some paint. And it's funny because, like, I don't consider myself a painter, but I get painted looks here and there from that method. And it's my own, like, weird twisty way, just from me kind of figuring things out here and there, since I like my painting like, I went to college for comics, and right when I left college, I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do comics.
Right.
But I went to comics because I wanted to learn how to draw, kind of like how you did art